Christian parenting. I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. You're listening to the All Mom Does podcast, part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Today on the All Mom Does podcast, I have Allison Fallon with me, and she's going to help us get our brains detangled, right? Is that enough of a promise? Is that an expectation that I can set right now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, well, so no pressure. I just want to make sure that was right. So Allison, tell my listeners where you are, where you live, cats, dogs, all the things.
Well, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. We've lived here for all of a month, barely. My husband and I just recently moved from Pasadena, California, where he had been for the last 12 years. We're newly married. We have a 5-month-old baby. We have a little puppy named Shiloh. She's very cute. She's tiny. She's like 15 pounds. And yeah, we have a great little family life. We're just kind of, at the start of it.
Yeah. So, I'm hearing a whole wave of people I'm in Austin. So we have a whole wave of people coming from California, the Austin area. But I've also been hearing this about Nashville. And it sounds like you guys are part of that wave.
We're part of the wave. It's a weird time to live in such a densely populated city with the global pandemic happening and the fires that happened in the summer. And we were just needing a break.
Yeah, so, you're ready to move on. Well, welcome to Nashville, one of my favorite towns.
Thank you.
I'm usually there several times a year. Haven't been there in several months now because of everything going on. But great city. So I know you're going to love it there.
City. Well, thanks.
So take me back. You were trying to get some clarity in your world. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of us, we do all kinds of different things. We download the meditation apps, which are great. And we're, trying to do more in terms of our physical fitness, or we might be walking with a purpose or different kinds of things. But you found something that has worked really powerfully for you that is so simple. What is it?
It's writing, which is funny because writing has been a part of my life for about as long as I can remember. I have always really loved writing and been drawn to writing and been good at it. And because of that, I, entered into a profession where I was working in publishing and working with authors and teaching writing workshops. And, it's always been such a huge part of my professional life. But it wasn't until I started to bump up against some obstacles in my personal life that I realized how powerful of a tool writing could be, not just to, put your words in a book and get your book out in the world, but also to just generate more clarity in your life and to better understand who you are and where you come from, and as a tool for self-help and self-therapy and self-care. And there are just so many ways that we can use this tool called writing that I, in the early parts of my career, I don't think I quite saw what a powerful tool it could be until I really needed it. And then I started using it for myself.
Now, when you talk about writing, there's so many iterations of that, right? I mean, there's everything from somebody saying, I'm finally going to do it, I'm going to write the book, to, well, I need to jot some things down that I think are important that I take note of. So are you talking about physically writing, and are you talking about trying to keep track of some thoughts in that way? Or are you saying, hey, just go for it and start to write that, dragon fantasy novel you've always dreamed of?
So the type of writing that I'm talking about, which is backed by a ton of data, by the way, that shows that this can improve your mood and strengthen your immune system and increase your confidence and all these other things. This type of writing is defined in the data as expressive writing. That's the term that's used to define
expressive writing. Okay.
The definition of expressive writing is expressing your deepest thoughts and feelings about a particular subject. So what's fascinating to me that I learned as I started unpacking this research is this can look so many different ways. It can look like jotting down a couple of notes to yourself in the morning. It can look like, probably not like a traditional to-do list, but if you were to list like the 3 things that are most important for you today, that could be considered expressive writing. Also, the data shows that fiction writing, if you have like a harebrained idea to write down, a fantastical story, that as long as you're expressing your own deepest thoughts and feelings through that writing, that fiction writing can actually bring many of these same positive changes to your life. So this is the beauty of the practice, is that there are so many different ways that this can look. It doesn't have to be long and involved. You don't have to write for 2 hours every day. You could have a practice that takes you 2 minutes a day or 5 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day, and you can still experience so many of the benefits that writing has to bring.
For myself, also being a writer, I think that I intuitively just always knew it was something that felt so good to me and something that helped me process, even when I had no idea all the connections to the psychology of it and why it matters and how it can help. Now, there is some interesting data out there too. I wonder if you ran across this. I love to type because I'm a fast typer and I can get in the word counts alley. I mean, I can crank through it, but I also still continue to write longhand. And I've seen some interesting data. I'm sure you have better optics on it than I do. The importance at times of writing things down by hand because of the brain-hand graphite or ink connection. What can you tell me about that?
So the data shows that the benefits you get from the writing process are slightly better if you use a pen and paper, although I think the real power of the writing process is that writing helps you access a part of your brain that we don't access very often in our lives. And that's really important to us. I could talk all about how it's important to us. But the fact of the matter is, as you're typing on your computer, you're accessing that same part of your brain as long as you're doing expressive writing. If you're typing on your phone with two thumbs, you're accessing that same part of your brain. If you use a pen and paper, you're accessing that same part of your brain. So the thing that I encourage writers to do is, I'm a huge fan of pen and paper. I have literally in front of me pages of notes that I take during the day because it helps me to remember the things that I need to remember. However, if it's an obstacle for you to actually doing the writing, if, for example, you think like, well, I just would never do it because I don't like writing by hand, then don't get stuck on that. Find ways to make sure that you don't get stuck. So, if the Notes app on your iPhone is the way that you can most easily quickly record a thought that you have or a note that you want to make to yourself, then great, do that. If it's on the back of a cocktail napkin, then great, do that. If it's in a journal, like on the dashboard of your car while you're waiting to pick your kids up from soccer practice or whatever, wherever you can find a way to actually, execute on the writing, then take it for what you can get rather than having it be an obstacle that gets in your way.
I love that you make the on-ramp so easy because I, like you, I'm sitting here with my notebook with all the things. And, for years, I finally did switch over to a digital calendar and I've really remained on that. That was a big moment for me because I was very much a paper calendar person for years and years and years. But I do love that you make the on-ramp easy in what you're saying because I feel like, Allie, so often when we want to do something that is about self-care, we can unintentionally make it so much harder than it needs to be. We all of a sudden take what we are going to decide are a set of rules about what it means to do something that's supposed to be good for us and make it harder than it should be. And I think this is one of those things. You don't have to, I love what you're saying that, there is benefit to writing by hand. There's some beautiful things about that. But I love what you're saying about don't let that stand in your way. Maybe it gives you a couple ticks more to the optimum to do it that way, but don't let it be something that holds you back from continuing this type of practice.
Yeah, it's such an important part of this conversation because I think especially when it comes to something like writing, we can find an infinite number of ways to get in our own way or to stay stuck because we have these cultural messages about writing that have been passed down to us that only a certain group of people deserve to be writers or are allowed to be writers or get to write their words down, that it's this sort of elite, particularly trained, talented group of people. Maybe you look at me and you think like, well, you've written a bunch of books, you've published a bunch of books. So, because you've gotten this book contract or because whatever it is that you've done, you happen to be good at this. And so you're a writer, but I'm not a writer. And the fact of the matter is at the end of the day, we have to admit that we're all writers. Every single person who's listening to this writes, composes, and sends at least 3 text messages of some kind every single day. You write text messages, you write direct messages on your social media accounts, you write a caption for social media and you post it, you write a letter to a friend, you write an email to your boss, to your coworkers, whatever. We're always writing. And so writing we don't have to overcomplicate it. It's communication. Writing is a way to better understand the world that we live in, to sort of define the things that we're experiencing, to communicate those things to another person, to connect. There's so many ways that we can use writing that I think we do it ourselves a disservice and we do writing itself a disservice if we say, well, in order to be a writer, I have to have X, Y, Z in place. I have to have perfect grammar, or I have to be a really good speller. I have to, understand a 5-paragraph essay structure. It's got to look this certain way. And it just really doesn't.
Again, back to your phrase, expressive writing. I think that's so great because it really does take some of those parameters or expectations or, places where we might not feel as confident about our writing off of there. Now, talk to me about this. I have the diaries that I kept when I was a kid. My oldest child, who is now 30, she is a prolific journaler. From the time she was really young, we made it part of our homeschool experience to be doing a prompt a day and writing a day. And she's one of the ones that really grabbed hold of it and has continued on and on. She and I have both laughed. When you look back at some of the stuff where we were really, expressing ourselves and writing through our angst and on and on, I got to be honest, Allie, there's some stuff there that's kind of embarrassing. There's some stuff that potentially could be hurtful to someone, even though that's not the intention. It's just trying to process through it. I find that sometimes that can be a stumbling block to being honest on the page, is the concern that, oh man, I'm going to look back at this and think, what was I thinking? Or if somebody came across this, I wouldn't want it to hurt them. So now I'm feeling like I can't quite be as honest in this little private space of this page. How do we navigate some of that?
Well, one of my great teachers in this topic is a woman named Julia Cameron, who's probably best known for her book called The Artist's Way. And she talks about what she teaches is a practice she calls morning pages, where you write for 40 minutes or 3 pages every morning, whichever comes first. And she talks about throwing away your morning pages or deleting them or burning them or getting rid of them in some way and never going back to read them. I don't necessarily think that we always have to throw away our words or burn them or whatever, but I do think that there's value in what she teaches because of exactly what you're talking about, that the point is not necessarily to go back and read these things for ourselves. The point is definitely not necessarily to share with another person, although there does come a point when it can be really helpful and connective to share a piece of our writing with someone else. But the point is simply to the way I talk about it in the book is metabolizing your life. And by that, I just mean we have constant input in our lives. We're experiencing things. We're seeing images on the news. We're having, podcasts and books and words and coaches and therapists and pastors and whatever, speaking to us. And we have all of this input. And what do we do with that input? Imagine if you ate food every day and you didn't have a metabolism that could pull in the food, break it down into pieces, figure out what's good for you and what you need as nutrients, pull that out, and then discard the stuff that's just not good for you. If you didn't have that system in your body, then the food you ate would get stuck. It would literally become toxic inside of your system. And so we need a way to metabolize all of the things that are coming into our space on any given day. Writing is an amazing way to do that. As you write about what happens to you, that's exactly what you're doing, is you're breaking it down into pieces. You're figuring out how to make meaning of what you have experienced. And the way that we make meaning of our lives becomes the way that we show up in the world. It becomes the way that we live our lives. It becomes our own experience of our lives. And so, literally nothing could be more important than the way that we're making meaning of our lives. And most of us are doing that passively, accidentally, unconsciously, without ever really recognizing what we're doing. And writing simply just brings it into our consciousness.
I love that phrase, metabolize. That is just a great way of looking at this process of writing and seeing the value that can be there. I think that's really, really powerful. Now, you talk about that there are 3 things people can do that means they're journaling wrong. As much as I talked about you've created this beautiful, easy on-ramp for if it's going to be on your phone, if it's going to be a couple minutes, if it's going to be a 40-minute sesh, whatever it's going to be, take the rules down, just get into expressive writing. And now let's flip it and talk about the 3 things that we can do that don't get us off to that great start.
Well, I think overestimating our expectations for what writing can do for us. I give a couple of cautions for this in the book. I talk about writing as therapy, and I'm a huge advocate of using writing as a tool for self-therapy. I think it can be an excellent tool along with a therapeutic process. If you're already seeing a therapist, it can kind of speed up and expedite your process with the therapist. If you're not seeing a therapist, but you've thought of seeing a therapist and you're kind of scared to jump in the water, writing can be an amazing tool to dip your toe in the water and kind of test it out and see how you feel about this idea of self-reflection and self-discovery. So writing can be an amazing tool for therapy, but one of the cautions I give is that we can't expect that writing is going to heal all of our wounds or solve all of our problems in a matter of moments. And I think because we live in a culture where so many of our problems can be solved so quickly, with the push of a button, we can have food delivered to our house. We can have groceries delivered overnight. We can have anything you want. You can have delivered to you in a matter of moments. So because of that, we have this sense that complicated problems should be able to be resolved really fast, easily.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that that's just not the case, that there are some things that part of the solution is learning how to exist in spite of the discomfort or to exist in spite of the lack of resolution. And I actually think writing helps to support, it acts like as a support for us to do that because, well, I'll just give a personal example from my life. So anxiety has been a part of my life for about as long as I can remember. I can remember, being really little, like 6, 7, 8 years old and having what I would call now panic attacks or anxiety attacks. And it's just been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I've gone through seasons of being medicated for anxiety or, being in therapy specifically to focus on my anxiety. And then seasons where it feels like it's a little bit easier to deal with. But writing is one of the ways that I have learned to live with my own anxiety. Because what I can see when I sit down to write on the page, even if I write 2 pages or 3 pages and then I throw it away when I'm done, what I see when I write down the words on the page is a lot of these thoughts that are spinning in your head that are causing you so much anxiety aren't even true, aren't even real.
Right.
They're just figments of your imagination. You've made them up in your head. And it's impossible for me to see that when they're spinning around in my head. But when I put them on the page, I have a little bit more of an ability to go, oh, I see where that's coming from. I understand where that tape started and now it's playing on repeat. And it gives me a little bit more agency to decide that I'm not going to allow that thought to continue to drive my feeling about myself or my behavior for the rest of the day. So it's not a perfect fix. It's not a magic pill. It's not like, oh, poof, I have no more anxiety, but it acts as this kind of like friend for me and a support for me when, like probably if I was calling a friend every day of my life and talking to them about my anxiety, they probably would tell me to go hire a therapist. But
that might get a little old for him. Yeah. Just a little. I do love that it allows each of us to become an observer to our own lives in a fresh way. It's interesting to me, Allie, we pull out, we've had all these kids over this span of time. And so we've had different iterations of videoing the kids, right? So we've got everything from our oldest child, the big VHS tapes, to some of these younger ones. We've got the little mini DVs that play on nothing, so we're having to figure out all the wires and everything to be able to watch these movies. Allie, I'm telling you, it's always a bit of a shock when I go back and watch some of these and I watch myself in some of these and to be reminded again about the tone of voice I was using or my countenance in some of my conversation. And sometimes the way that I remember an event versus the way it plays out on video. It's very interesting. So this idea that we can take a step back and observe and have a moment to process, but still capture it and be able to look at it through words, it just seems like a really powerful tool to me.
Man, the way you said that is just so perfect too. I like to quote an author who I love. Her name is Marianne Williamson. She talks about how the greatest miracles in our lives are usually not a change in circumstance, but a change in perspective.
Oh, yeah.
So to have the idea about our life that we may not have total control over our circumstances, but even those circumstances are taking place around us, there are 1,000 ways, or maybe 50,000 or 100,000 or whatever, that we could choose to look at that same set of circumstances. There are so many different lenses that we could take on that same set of circumstances. And what a superpower to be able to have the gift of retrospect while you're actually living in a circumstance, to be able to go, here are the set of circumstances, the kind of cards that I've been dealt, the hand that I'm dealing with. And yet there are many, many different ways that I could choose to look at this set of circumstances. I could choose this way. I could choose this way. I could choose this way. Which of these ways would be the most constructive for me? Which is going to give me the most agency and control? Which is going to make me feel the most empowered? One of the things I've used writing for really recently in my own life is I gave birth to my daughter right in the midst of this pandemic in LA. I gave birth in July. And it's my first time being a mother, first pregnancy, first birth. I had, as I'm sure so many of us do, like these ideas in my head of how the birth was going to go. Yeah. I was supposed to give birth at a birth center. It was supposed to be in a tub. It was going to be this really like spiritual experience. And instead it was like, rushed to the hospital, blood pressure skyrocketed. My daughter wasn't getting enough oxygen. Epidural, like all the things.
Right.
And it was really hard for me to cope with that after it all. And then also she was in the NICU for a week. I had to leave the hospital and go home without her. And that experience of driving home without her was like the most heartbreaking. In the moment when I was living it, it was just like it just wrecked me.
Yeah.
And in my head, when I would like replay the events of what happened, no matter how I did it, I couldn't get over the feeling that this had just been a massive failure on my part. If only I had been more focused, if only I had done better with the breathing. If only I had, paid attention to my blood pressure throughout the pregnancy, whatever, like everything could have gone differently. And it wasn't until I started writing down the story that, just like you're talking about, like you're viewing like a video of yourself almost, that I started to see myself as such a champion. I was like, whoa, you are amazing that you brought this little girl into the world in spite of all these obstacles. My husband and I were separated for 3.5 hours. I was having contractions 2 minutes apart, thinking I'm going to have this baby any minute. And my husband is like, can't even come up to the room because he hasn't passed the health inspection.
Right.
And I'm like, the fact that you did that by yourself, you're a warrior.
Right, right.
But I didn't have that perspective on my experience until I started to write it down. So I think this is the gift that writing gives us, is just like you're talking about. You did such a good job of explaining that it allows us to see the same set of circumstances from a different angle. And that different angle is what saves us.
Absolutely. I think it's really a beautiful component of what you're promoting here in terms of write it down, get it out, be able to look at it in a way that's a little bit different. Now, I love the science stuff. I love to geek out on how this somatic connection between our thoughts and actually taking the time to do something physical to capture it. Because, we can keep our thoughts in our head, right? But there is something really unique in crossing that barrier from what rattles around and echoes in our brains to actually capturing it in a place that feels more tangible. So give me a little bit more of the science on how it changes the brain as we begin to express it in this way.
Our thoughts create our reality. We've all heard that. And yet that can be a frustrating realization because, whatever reality you're experiencing, if it's less than desirable, it can kind of leave you with this sense like maybe I created this for myself.
Right.
I find that to be really frustrating. The fact of the matter is, most of the thoughts that you think on a daily basis, you don't even know you're thinking. They're happening outside of your awareness. It's different depending on what study you look at, but 80% or more of the thoughts that you think on a daily basis, you don't even know you're thinking. This is why you can drive to the office that you've driven to every day for 20 years and you don't remember how you got there. You just went on autopilot and did it. It's why, when you're brushing your teeth, you don't have to sit there and think about, okay, push on the tube and then the toothpaste comes out, and you just go through the motions and it just happens. So because of that, most of these thoughts that are driving our daily behavior are living in a part of our brain called our limbic system that we don't access very often. It's on autopilot and it goes, and we don't really ever think about it. The problem with that is there are so many thoughts that we think that are happening outside of our awareness that are driving our behavior in a way that is less than ideal for us. So if you have a habit or a behavior in your life that keeps playing on repeat, or maybe an experience that keeps playing on repeat that you think like, I couldn't possibly be making this happen for myself. I don't want this to happen for myself. Like maybe you find yourself consistently, drinking 3 glasses of wine at night. And then after you do it, you think like, I don't even like the way that I feel when I do that. Why did I do that? And every morning you wake up and you think, I'm not going to do that tonight. And then 6 o'clock rolls around and, your boss is mad at you and your husband, your spouse is frustrated and your kids are screaming and you're just like, forget it. You find yourself drinking the wine again. Those behaviors that are on repeat in our life are grown out of those thoughts that live in our limbic system that we don't even know are there. So
it's demanding we do, and we don't even realize that it's embedded there. Yeah.
Completely. Now, the beauty of writing is that writing will help you go into your limbic system, to leave your frontal cortex where we live most of our lives, go into your limbic system to uncover and unpack those beliefs, the silent beliefs that are driving our daily behavior, pull them up into your conscious mind. And then now suddenly you have far more leverage and control to change them. I'm careful to say with the writing process, this doesn't mean that you have total control over every circumstance in your life, because you cannot control what other people do. But you can certainly control what you do, and that's a lot.
Right.
So, I've worked with clients, helping them. People have set better boundaries in friendships, and started seeing how a lot of the drama that they were dealing with in their life that caused them stress just goes away because they just get better at setting boundaries. People are able to change daily habits and behaviors. They're able to implement a really healthy relationship to exercise, maybe, or relationship to food that makes them feel better. They're able to end a bad habit, like drinking 3 glasses of wine at night, all through the power of pulling these subconscious thoughts up into our conscious mind and evaluating them and then deciding, what we want to do next.
Now we've talked about this. And I think you kind of talked, and you've touched on where I want to go next. We've talked about this process of taking what's already in our inner dialogue and committing it outward, so we can see it, we can process it, we can make some better decisions. Possibly, we can unpack some unconscious behavior processes that we're engaging in. And I agree with you. I don't want to get real woo woo, but talk to me about the process of the other way, where we're writing it down first to get it in. And what I mean by that is, writing down those things where we want to see change, writing down those things that are dreams and desires we have, so that we can begin to help stack that limbic system in a different direction to make ourselves, maybe more productive, or really have the confidence to go for that dream that we've had, or whatever the thing is. So what does that process look like? Is that also a valid part of writing it down, of journaling?
So the act of using words is what psychologists call affect labeling. And the power of affect labeling is it helps us to attach meaning to things. So like this mug, for example, like we all can commonly talk about this mug because we all know the word mug and can use the word mug. So this is the power of using language to talk about something. Like if we're talking about a dream that you want to achieve or something, when you put language to that dream, you can much better understand the dream than you could before you put language to it. Sometimes when we have dreams about our lives, they're very ethereal and they're kind of like they exist in images, but they don't exist in words yet. And there's something about putting words to the images that makes it much more concrete and therefore easier to achieve. But one of the tactics that I teach to writers, and this comes from a therapeutic practice, I didn't invent this, but it's a tactic called pre-scripting. And pre-scripting is the act of actually writing down how you want something to go before you have the experience with it. So what you would do is basically say you have a big meeting coming up at work, or I did this for myself the other day. I had a big webinar coming up. I was supposed to teach a webinar the day that my book released. And I was feeling a little nervous about it because this was content that I hadn't taught before. So what I would do is with pre-scripting is write the date at the top of the page as if the webinar is happening that day. And then I would write in present tense as if, it's happening today. This is what happens when I teach this webinar. So I would write down things like what the weather is like what I do that morning, what it feels like, what it looks like, what my senses are experiencing, who else is there, what happens, and write it almost like you're writing a screenplay, like you're watching it unfold on the big screen in front of you. And you'll find yourself get stuck in certain places because you haven't really thought through all of the details of how you want things to go. As you put language to the way that you want things to go, you'll realize that it makes it more concrete. It solidifies what you're trying to achieve. And as you solidify what you're trying to achieve with language, it makes it easier to achieve. So it doesn't mean that the way that you write it is necessarily going to happen word for word, but it gives your brain like a handhold, something to grab onto, so that when you begin to see what you're looking for, you can move toward it.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a great way of stating that. And it is phenomenal to me. We could, and there are many species on this planet that do, exist without language of the spoken language that we know, the complexity of the language that we know. But because our Creator imbued us with this incredible tool, it's amazing to me the way our brain engages in ways that are unique and different than any other species on the planet when it comes to this ability to use language to create constructs that have never existed. I've said before that, for any house we live in, any building that we're part of, any car that we drive, it all started with a conversation of words describing what could potentially be. And through those words, these things came into being. It's phenomenal to me in the Genesis account that, yes, God said something and then it began to happen. And when the practice of God writing down for his people what he wanted for us, everything changed. It's amazing to me when we see this connection of the power of creation to language. And again, to your point, it's not that everything we write down or everything we say is then somehow mandated in the universe to go exactly the way we want it to go. But yes, this ability to use it as a tuning fork for our brains, the way our brains were wired, absolutely exceptional. What do you think is the number one thing for people when it comes to this idea of writing it down? If somebody's saying, listen, Allie, I'm not a writer, I'm not good at it, I get writer's cramp within 2 seconds. Give us what a 2-minute practice would look like. Just a simple 2-minute practice that you feel like most people could do without any kind of hurdle.
Well, one of the simple 2-minute practices that I use is what I call note to self. And what I'll do is first thing in the morning, I will just write down on a piece of paper, I'll literally write note to self, colon. And then whatever I feel moved to write after that, it's something different every day. But, the other morning I felt moved to write note to self, you're a good mom. And you find that you can kind of like be your own encourager, be your own supporter, be your own cheerleader, be your own therapist, be your own coach in a way that we forget. We think that we have to like go outside of ourselves to find those truths. And actually what's true is that a lot of that wisdom that you want to live by anyway is already inside of you. And writing has this way of pulling it up and pulling it out so that you can, talk to yourself in the way that you wish other people would talk to you. So I find myself, saying like, note to self, the most important thing that you can do today is breathe. Mm-hmm. Just sort of like coming back to the simplicity of what really matters. And I think writing has a way of doing that for us, that it strips away all of the extras. It strips away all of what's not important. And it reminds you of what's really true and good and beautiful. And it can be so simple. It does not have to be complicated.
It makes me think that a lot of times when we talk about self-care and we remind ourselves to drink all of our water and get enough sleep and do those things for ourselves, I don't know that I really see anybody saying, hey, write what I would call lunchbox notes to yourself in your own hand to yourself. I'll do it for my husband. I'll do it for my kids, but just that you're special and God loves you and I love you. I mean, even to remind ourselves that we need to love ourselves. Those lunchbox notes, which to me is what you're describing when you say note to self, colon, and then whatever follows. That's a really important aspect of self-care, don't you think? That we just don't tend to practice.
Yeah. And I love the lunchbox notes. That's amazing. I might steal that from you with credit.
Go for it. Go for it, Allie. Well, Allie, I just can't thank you enough for being on. And the book is called The Power of Writing It Down, A Simple Habit to Unlock Your Brain and Reimagine Your Life. It's available everywhere this week. Allie, just a delight to talk to you. So fascinating. I've got to have you back because I want to hear more of what you have to say on this important topic. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Julie.
You'll find more from this episode on the show notes. Be sure and check them out at allmomdoes.com. And wanted to ask you a big favor. Be sure and go to wherever you are listening to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us get the word out about the podcast. Can't wait to see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.